Do we need intro music or something? Like, dun-dun-dun.
Talk about that every single time. But we got the man himself here, Josh Rynderman, who is an intro music of himself, a superstar. And I'm about to pour some wine, and it is 11:57 a.m. where I am,
Right.
and you, because we are not in Cape Town. But a great welcome to my friend, our friend, a friend of the podcast, Josh Rynderman of Essa Winery in South Africa. Thank you for being here. Literally here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I just wanted to quickly thank Rabbi Bernath for your time and for having me on the podcast. Kenny, thank you very much for having me.
Very excited to have you. I mean, does it get better? Luke, we're just getting superstar after superstar. So we've really made it,
I
Rap.
am so jealous that I'm not in Baltimore right now.
Like I just said before, pre-podcast, I said the real time to be here was last night, and I'm still feeling the effects a little bit, but we were lucky to have a tasting with Josh, I think the first of its kind. And welcome to Baltimore. It was really wonderful having you here last night,
Thank you.
and again, we're going to pick your brain a little bit. And I know a lot of people want to learn about your winery, want to hear about your journey, your wine journey. And I guess let's talk first because we like to go dive right into the wine. So I'm going to let you.
All right.
Some people actually watch this, so we can put it on
There you
camera
go.
too, but you can say what it is.
So we're tasting our 2024 Live and Love Rosé. It's a rosé named after my twin daughters, Levana and Ahava. And it's actually the first 2024 rosé on the market, on the kosher market. Being in the Southern Hemisphere, South Africa has its harvest season between January and March. And we were able to make a rosé in a fairly quick time frame and actually export it to the United States in time for summer. So that's what we have in our glasses here. It's a blend of Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc, very, very fascinating aromatics. But the first vintage that we released of our rosé was a 2022, and it was made in a very, very different style. And we got feedback from a lot of customers that they wanted a more Provence style rosé. So that's what this is. This is a vibrant rosé, great acidity, wonderful fruit forward aromatics. And overall, I think a fantastic value for your money and a fantastic wine as well.
What does this retail at?
On the shelf, it should be about $18.99
Well,
to 20 or so.
certainly great value. Um, I think the prominent note there is that Sauvignon Blanc, that brightness and the citrus. I wish you could taste this with us,
I
Rabbi.
am like sitting here
Rabbi?
wanting to be in
Oh, is
Baltimore
it?
and wanting to be in South Africa.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It is an absolute opposite wine of the Live and Love 22,
Yeah.
which was a heavier rosé and darker and more full-bodied. I think this is probably the trend, right? I mean, that's why I guess it's an interesting thing that you have a winemaker who's really young but within that, it wasn't one vintage, it was two vintages, but the first one you made since 22, right? Made such a whole shift change based on customer feedback. And like you have this absolutely different style now, and I love it. I mean, I think this is exactly, what people want when they drink. This is what I want when I drink rosé. And I think, as I've said here before, rosé is not really never my choice. I am someone who like anytime it's a time for rosé, I'd rather have white wine personally, but this satisfies that exact thing that I'm looking for a lot of times, and that price is, something else we've talked about. I really want to talk more about, not with you, but in general, is that I think rosé, like that, I have trouble paying $35, $40 for rosé. This is a proper price point, I think, for it. Because when you're looking for it, it's kind of that like refresher. That's the way I look at rosé. And this really fills that niche.
No,
So well done.
thank you. Thank you. I think
Josh,
rosé should be
yeah,
cheerful, but and I think
Cheap and cheerful.
I think it really should
cheap and cheerful.
fill those two categories, and I believe our 2024 absolutely does.
I agree.
Josh, you pointed at a Côte de Provence and the Provence style rosé. For people who don't know what that is, can you talk a little bit about that and what you did with it?
There's, I mean, the very typical and most well-known rosés on the market, both non-kosher as well as kosher, are Provence style rosés that are typically, they've got very refreshing acidity, fruit forward, aromatics, easy drinking, and very summery wines. Like, it's something that you would grab on a hot day poolside. And whereas our 2022 was more food-friendly, focused, heftier due to the barrel fermentation and aging Surly. This was made in the Provence style, in that we kept it fresh, we kept the aromatics fruit-focused, and it's supposed to be that very refreshing summer wine. It's supposed to be that wine you reach for on a hot summer's day.
What is the actual winemaking difference between this style of rosé and the 22 rosé that you made? Like, what's the approach as a winemaker that makes them different?
There are a lot of components to making a wine in the style that the winemaker chooses. Some of them being the alcohol content, and you can control that by picking the fruit earlier. And that also assists with the higher percentage of acidity, making that style. So, we excluded barrel fermentation in comparison to the 2022 from the 2024. And barrel fermentation typically adds a lot of heft and weight to the palate. And when you're trying to make a fresh, zesty rosé, that's something that you don't want to do. So when we made the 22, that was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to see how far I could take rosé in terms of its heft and weight and size. And we basically did none of the things that we did with the 2024. So complete opposite end of the spectrum of rosé.
All right, and it definitely drinks that way. Like, it's an absolute. But I would hope that you continue experimenting and trying different approaches. But of course, you have to sell wine, which is always the bottom line. Before we get to, we have, thankfully, Josh has brought 4 wines here, and at least some of us are gonna taste through them. Again, sorry, Rabbi.
You're rubbing it in. You're just rubbing it in.
But why don't you talk a little bit about your journey into wine, how you got started, and a little bit of your history, and how you came to this point of making wine in South Africa?
Sure. So I was introduced to the world of winemaking when I ended up sitting down next to Benyamin Cantz, winemaker and proprietor of Four Gates Winery in Santa Cruz Mountains. I ended up sitting down next to him. There was a Friday night kiddush over Sukkot. And at the time, I was in university studying psychology, and I was listening to Benjamin talk about what he did for an occupation. And there's this 70-year-old man discussing his passion, and to me, it was this 70-year-old man doing everything by himself. It was very, very fascinating. But at the time, I offered my assistance. I said, "Do you need any help schlepping heavy things around the winery?" And as it turns out, he absolutely did. So on my spare time, on a Sunday or in the afternoon during the week, I went up to Four Gates to assist, and he paid me in odds and ends from around the winery, unlabeled bottles, things that had fallen through the cracks. But at the time, I had no idea that I was actually getting paid in gold, and drinking these wines, I quickly realized that there was this whole world of flavor and just fascinating winemaking stuff, and I quickly realized that this is something that I really wanted to get into. And so that was back in 2014, and we made our first wine in 2015. I made my first wine in 2015. Kosher, California wine. And it's completely snowballed from the very typical Silicon Valley startup, in my mom and dad's garage, quite literally, to what it is today. So we produce ESSA now in South Africa and have been since 2018, and our wines are imported by Royal Wine Corp, and they're distributed along the East Coast and Florida and a few other locations throughout the States. But like I said, it's completely snowballed into a real business, and um, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that I've been able to learn so much along the way, and it's very much been a trial and error process. But like I said, I'm very, very proud of what I'm able to produce, and um, and yeah, I mean that's basically the whole story in a nutshell.
Well, you mentioned also, because I heard you talk about it last night, but you talked about the names, and I thought that was an interesting story how you came up with the name Kosher and how you came up with the name Essa. So I'd love to hear that story.
Well, we were looking for a name for our California brand, which predates the South African brand by a good couple of years, and it was a complete happenstance. You know, it was a Friday night, and we was discussing the potential names with my parents, and I flipped to the back of the venture, and Havdalah is in the back of the venture, and I was reading through it, and the sentence popped out at me: "Kosher asa uv'shem Hashem akra," and it stuck out to me in the fact that, well, I'm Yoshua, and Yeshua's redemption is the same sharish and everything, and so we named our California brand Kosher Yeshuos. But when we started the South African operation, we also thought long and hard about what we wanted to name the brand from South Africa. And it took some time, but I ended up just carrying along the sentence, Kosher Yeshuos Essa, a cup of salvation, Aarde. So Essa is our South African brand, and while I haven't produced Kosher Yeshuos in a few years, I'd still absolutely love to do it in the future. But Kosher Yeshuos Essa, a cup of salvation, Aarde, and appreciation for everything that God has done for me and for my family.
You
It's a
don't
beautiful thing.
sound South African. You don't have the South African
Oh,
accent.
I'm not South African. My wife is South African. She sounds very South African. No. I'm born in California, raised in Boston, and moved back to California, only to find a girl halfway across the world, and a good reason to move to Cape Town. So, yeah, no, not South African.
It's I think years ago already when I wrote a piece about you, I think I called it something like the bi-hemispheric
Yes.
winemaker or something. Talk about how that works on a calendar year, how you're able to do that. I know it's obviously very, very difficult to do one harvest and making one vintage of wine in one place. How are you even able to juggle that? Is that something you can continue doing?
So it's a good question. You know, it's a lot more difficult to juggle winemaking in two hemispheres when you've got a family, because you've got to have a home base when you've got a family. So thank God we were blessed with twin daughters in 2022, and actually since then I haven't been able to do the Northern Hemisphere harvest in California. But in general, the years that I was able to do the winemaking in both hemispheres, it's a logistical challenge because things are happening at the exact same time that you really should be paying attention to. So, you know, the growing season in South Africa starts out with bud break sometime around now, actually in September. But that's the smack in the middle of the harvest in California. So you've got to have great contacts on the ground in the location that you are not currently in. And you've got to have a relatively trusted team to oversee the wines in also the location that you're not currently in. So if I'm doing the harvest in California, I need to know that everything's actually okay at the winery in South Africa. And it can be challenging to figure out the logistics. But for a number of years, I was able to do so, 2018 until 2021. That was our last harvest in California. So it's a big challenge. Yeah, it's a big challenge.
I miss that Kosher Sauvignon.
I do as well. I do as well.
And so you were doing that on the Four Gates estate.
That's correct. Yeah.
Sourcing those grapes and you were doing it in the winery there. And that's interesting. And of course, for those who don't know, I say, and I tell people that Josh learned under a legend and really a special person in Benyo from Four Gates, who a lot of people that love kosher wine I think it's our version of a cult winery. I mean, because it's small, as boutique as it gets, and really run by a special person, and it has that it's known for, selling so quickly and whatever. So that's very interesting, and that's, I think, a cool background that you learned at his hand. But you're now, like, you're really doing some special things in South Africa. The quality of wine in South Africa needs you, I think. So I imagine that and you can answer this, but the California thing probably will be difficult. But I think it's a really important thing that you're doing, because, like, something I think what we have loved to see in the kosher wine world is the expansion of different regions, of different terroir, and to have a really high quality wine made in that region, I think, is an important thing for the kosher wine world. So thank you for filling it. Let's why don't we taste? Why don't you introduce it? How about that?
So the next wine we'll be tasting will be our white wine. This is a Bordeaux style white wine blend. Our white wine blend is Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, but we've named it Altira. Do not fear. Our first vintage of this was actually during the tail end of COVID, and I wanted to commemorate that whole time period with a wine, and so we stuck with the name Altira, which means do not fear. And it's a fascinating white wine, also great value for money. But one of the unique aspects of this wine is that we ferment and age in acacia. We've got custom-made 500-liter acacia barrels, so not oak like most winemakers use with their wines, but a different wood altogether. It even looks different. It's got a yellow
Oh,
tinge to it.
biblical.
Yes, actually, that was one of the comments that we got last night during the dinner. But yes, absolutely. So it's a very, very unique wine. But the acacia wood lends itself to respecting the aromatics of the fruit, and it lifts the aromatics of the fruit instead of being very overt in its application like oak tends to be. It takes a back seat, and it's more about the physical attributes of the wine instead of being all very, like I said, overt in its application.
I would say that I would probably have a hard time guessing that there's oak there.
Well, wood, no oak.
That what? I'm sorry.
It's wood, not
Okay.
yeah.
Not oak.
Okay,
Sorry,
wood. Not oak, yes.
Sorry, it's the wrong phrase. I would have a hard time guessing there's any wood in there almost. And I think what you're saying, you can see it in the glass, and that it's very aromatic. Then what's the advantage? Is it an aging thing? Is it how you want it to immediately be presented, that you use the acacia versus not using anything?
Well, so it started out with just an experiment. I had an example from Herzog. Herzog made a Sauvignon Blanc in acacia for its wine club members, and I was fascinated by the concept of using acacia for winemaking instead of oak. And after doing a little bit of research and talking to other winemakers about their opinions of acacia, I realized that it wasn't something that was used all over the place. It's a very, very small portion of the wine world, even non-kosher.
Is there another kosher wine currently aged in acacia?
To my knowledge, there is not.
Yeah. Interesting. But as it presents right now, that maybe it softens it, it rounds it a little bit, and it's not as bracing because you're using Sauvignon Blanc, and it's really a special wine. And as I was telling Josh last night, I think this is probably the best value white wine on the market. Where is this priced? And
the same as the rosé, so also about $18.99 to $20.
Incredible value. I never want to encourage you to raise your prices too much because I'm the one paying that, but this is great wine, and it tastes like wine, 2 to 3 times that price.
No.
I've actually noticed that, Josh, about your wine, and I'm curious because often, and this is unfortunate, and as Kenny said, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by saying this, but often people attribute the value of a wine with its price. And I've always noticed that you've kept your wines at a very low price, which It does not affect the taste at all, but it does affect the kind of how people look at it. They look at, oh, that's a low end wine. And so, why have you done that? Is there a particular reason for that?
Well, I think well, there are a few reasons. The main one being South Africa. South African wine has a reputation for being high quality and yet inexpensive. We have significant costs when it comes to hechsherim as well, as we now have 3 hechsherim on our wine. But I was okay with taking a hit if it meant that more from Jews would make kiddush over our wine and make brachos over our wine. And I'm very, very proud to say that that's a concept that Benyamin actually instilled in me going back to my Four Gates days. He's an individual who, at any point in the process, would take a moment and say "L'kavod Shabbos Kodesh, L'kavod Yom Tov," and it's something that I've also continued to do with my own wines. But it's special when I know that our wines are more reachable to the average consumer, and Jews buy wine for Yom Tov and Shabbos, and for people to be able to make brachos over my wine, kiddush and everything like that. It's meaningful to me. So I am trying to make my wines as available as possible, and I don't think my wines are cheap, and they're certainly not cheaply made, but they are certainly more accessible to a wider range of the market than if we would, price it accordingly, at a higher price point.
No
Part of
question.
that perception, I think, and that was a very good question. I think about that all the time. But part of that is in the bottle itself and the way the bottle looks. And these bottles, not only, by the way, love the label and I love the coloring. I'm sure a lot of thought went into that. But also, even the rosé and the $20 white, they all have the wax around it. That's something that costs money. Everything here costs money. It's a heavier bottle. It looks like a more expensive wine. When I see this, I'm not thinking, I actually would be surprised that that's $18, $20, $22, whatever you're paying for that. I'm thinking when I see a bottle like that and the way it appears that has more value, it's all perception, and you and I know better. Obviously, you know better, but there's obviously money put into the bottle. So I think while it's almost surprising how inexpensive it is, and it certainly doesn't drink that way, but that's an interesting topic, is that in South Africa, that to some degree you can probably make wine of such high quality at a better value for yourself, for the winemaker, than you can in a place like California.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that firsthand both. So that's, but it's good for us that as consumers,
Great.
that these bottles are available, because we all know, especially in the kosher market, how expensive everything is. And I'm not talking just wine, food. So to be able to really get value, and I think, a non-kosher keeping person would happily pay that for this bottle. And that's unfortunately uncommon, I think, in our world. So
I tell people all the time that Essa is possibly the best value kosher wine that exists.
That's a huge compliment. Yeah, I'm proud that we can say that about our wine. A lot of passion, time, and sweat and energy goes into making every single bottle, and I'm just glad that we can get it into people's homes at a relatively affordable price, and like I said, have Jews make kiddush over our wine. It's really, really, truly meaningful to me.
I think it means something to me as someone who's from, to hear a winemaker say that about how they had. Listen, there's a lot of great wines coming out of, I'm happy they exist, coming out of non-kosher French chateaus, and it's a special thing that they make, runs for us. But like when you hear a winemaker say that it was made, l'shem mitzvah, that's a beautiful thing. And I think it translates to the glass also. So amazing.
So is it hand dipped?
Everything, every single bottle is hand dipped. Yes. I got a question last night as to why we do the wax seal and how that all started. But it all happened just out of necessity, actually. The bottling lines in South Africa don't have the foiling mechanism that they do here in South Africa. You'd have to get a whole nother truck in to do that. So what we would do is we would bottle and we put all of our wines in bins and seal them up, as they currently would only have the one seal, which would be the cork. And the mashgiach and I would go in on a winter's day, and we'd open up a bin or two and just hand dip every single bottle. Every single one is done by hand. We don't have machines to do it. We're not bulk producers. And I like to think of it as that final check before the bottle goes to the labeling line. So every single bottle passes by my eyes one last time after the bottling line, and it's just one extra step that we're happy to do to make sure that everything is on the up and up. Everything is perfectly fine by the time it gets labeled.
That's real.
How long does it take? How long does it take?
It's actually gotten to the point where I could probably beat one of the machines. I mean, we don't produce all that much, but we're doing 8,000 bottles hand waxed in a winter, and I'm pretty darn quick with it. Yeah.
So the wax though is it's a kosher thing primarily. So otherwise you would need the foil. You need that second seal.
Yes, absolutely. You need the second seal, yes.
And you can't do the foil, you're saying, at least at the current.
So you can, but then you have to do it at the same time you're doing the labeling. So either I get a lot of Shomer Shabbos juice in to do a labeling day, or I just get the one mashgiach in to do the labeling if it's already been sealed with a second seal. So it's logistics.
But it's an interesting thing, because I think it adds perceived value to the bottle. It looks nicer, and I think it's something unique about having that way also.
Yeah.
That said, I've always struggled with getting, and what is the way to do it? Because a lot of people ask me that, and I have how I do it now, but people get this and they don't know how to attack the bottle.
So the best way to open up a bottle with wax as a second seal is to just go for it, pretend the wax is not there, and just put the corkscrew in and lift the whole thing out. Because usually the cork will pull the wax off the top, and you'd get a pretty good opening that way.
Well, it does, but I have in the years of learning how to deal with that, I think I have the battle scars to show that what you're saying is correct. And doing it, trying to cut the wax is not the right way to do it.
It's unique. It's fairly unique in the kosher market. There are not too many wax sealed wines, but all of our bottles are sealed with wax. And like I said, the easiest way to do it is just to go for it. Pretend like the wax isn't there.
Well, my glass is empty, and we have two more wines. So why don't you
introduce?
Yes.
The reds.
The red. So this is our 2022 Cabernet Sauvignon from a location in South Africa called Franschook, which means French corner in Afrikaans. And it's a region that was populated by the French Huguenots who came to South Africa and settled there in Franschook, and they brought with them all their winemaking techniques, and it was such a French area that it was called Franschook. But there are a lot of old vineyards there and a lot of old names in the South African winemaking community. So for our 2022 Cabernet Sauvignon, you shouldn't expect a blockbuster Cabernet like California tends to produce, but rather a more austere, restrained version, more red fruit focused, slightly lighter in body. And you still get the complexity as we age our red wines for at the very least 12 months in barrel, but it's not the big brutish Cabernet that most people tend to associate with the name.
And this is typical of South African wines and South African red wines, is that it's a more cooler climate style than you find in California Cab. Which is another reason, like there's obviously lots of cab on the kosher market. And a lot of people think cab when they think wine, because that's what they know, and we've discussed that. But what makes this unique, besides what you just said, are you going for the South African style, or you're going for some other unique style?
So this was the first year that we worked with the vineyard. So whenever you start working with a vineyard, you kind of have to get some idea as to what the vineyard can produce in itself. It's not capable of producing a California style wine. What it is capable of doing is making a wine, with the concept of terroir. So it is from a particular place, and it tastes like it's from a particular place. It's not going to taste like it's from California. It's not going to taste like it's from Israel or anything like that. But this is very typical of Cabernet from that area, from Franschook. And that's what we set out to do with the 2022 vintage of this Cabernet.
It is a fresh style. It's very fruity, and there's very bright acid in it. Approachable, but I think this can and will age. But it's that you see it in the glass. It's a lighter color. It's a lighter body than what a lot of people are used to, and I think delicious.
Yeah, it's very, very easy drinking.
You're 3 for 3 today.
Let's hope I can go all the way.
Well, I know the answer already. I drank plenty of these last night.
I'm kind of hoping that number 4 is the Emunah. If not, I'd love to talk about that.
So that's the wine that we'll have next, the 20, in my opinion, and money. Should we move on to the next?
Let's move on to the next one. I favorites here are the Altira and the Emunah. The Emunah, well, I'm going to let you present it, but I'll jump ahead a little bit and say that and tremendous why.
No, so we've been showcasing the 2020 Emunah for a while, and the individuals that we've tasted it on blind have asked if it's French in origin, and it's not French in origin. No, we've made this wine in South Africa. And the winemaking techniques that we've used along the way to produce it have been with the to Bordeaux wines. And so this is a blend of Cabernet Franc and Merlot, 75% Cabernet Franc and 25% Merlot. We've used neutral barrel, also on the fine sediment, things like that. And yeah.
I think that nailed it. That's exactly what I get out of it. Super old world, and yes, super earthy. Really great. I'm keep repeating myself, but tremendous value. I think it's hard to find wine on the market this way, especially that immediately you open it and this doesn't. I think a lot of what this achieves right away is sometimes what you're looking for in Bordeaux after it's been cellared for some time. Oh. And this is ready for prime time and fantastic. How do you think these wines, and maybe compare the two, and you obviously make other reds also, aging potential of your wines?
It's a great question. So
because there's not a lot of track record, obviously.
Exactly. Right? So when you want to cellar something, you kind of go off of, well, first of all, the quality of the wine, and in our wine, the quality is there, and but the other thing that you mentioned was the track record, and that's pretty difficult to do when you're just starting out. And this was our third vintage. 2020 was our third vintage, and so it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say. I think the quality is there to cellar it. The track record is not, obviously, but I don't think you'd be disappointed if you put a couple of bottles down for a number of years.
I agree. It has that like kind of rare combination of that, like I mentioned before, that it really is approachable and ready right out of the bottle, but I think it's going to lay down very well. Another great achievement. Similarly, you see it's a little bit of a lighter body. I think that's what's really unique about your wine, that it's very it's different from a lot of the wines that people have on their tables on a weekly basis. It has that cooler climate, and I think you're making the wines that are suitable. Where did you come up with the name Emunah and why?
So that's actually also a wine that we named during COVID. For the exact same reason I named it Emunah and Altira.
I'm going to cut you off for a second. I remember when this happened, and I'm like, you're starting a business out at the worst possible time. And I guess therein lies the answer of Altira and Emunah. But go ahead. I remember thinking, like, wow, how is he? But you persisted and amazing. But go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just always think about that.
Yeah, so our 2019 Emunah was the first vintage of Emunah, but we only blended it during COVID. It only came to be in 2020, and I do tend to name wines after meaningful concepts or things. You know, my twin daughters being Live and Love, Levana and Ahava. The Altira being named after that time period as well. And Emunah was the original, actually. That was our first blend. It was a Bordeaux style blend. And Emunah was something that I think I was lacking in during COVID. My wife was stuck in America during the lockdown for visa reasons. And I was there in South Africa by myself. And it wasn't a particularly pleasant time to be in South Africa. Their lockdown was quite intense and overreaching in numerous applications. But I again wanted to name it after that period in my life. And Emunah was something that I needed more of. So I had to physically make it. I had to physically make a wine that would fill the hole, so to speak. I'm not an alcoholic. But yeah, so that was the whole concept behind Emunah. We named it Faith.
Try being a shul president during COVID. Get back to that. Surprised I can still. Anyway, what does the PTSD that you involved?
Oh yeah, you're telling me.
What does the future hold for you? Like, first of all, in terms of you're obviously chosen a lot of French varieties. Do you plan to stick with that? Do you plan to experiment? Do you plan to experiment with those different varieties, different winemaking techniques? What's on your agenda for the next? What's your 5-year plan, or what's your 10-year plan?
Great question. I think winemakers love talking about the future, even though it's not at all in our hands, but it's part of the whole concept of winemaking. You've got to be able to look into the future, at least try to plan for the future. But recently, I mean, going forward, our 2023 releases and everything else going forward now has a more heimische Hechsher of Dan Harav Wolf from Amsterdam. So we're trying to expand the market as well, and the accessibility of our wines. And to the question of what we plan on producing, you know, we've got Kosher Pesach South African brandy in production, and I'm excited for the release of that next year, God willing. And
This coming Pesach.
Unfortunately, because South African brandy laws are so strict, it actually matters to the day when you've put your brandy in barrel. And if you're going to call it South African brandy, it must, by law, be aged for 3 years minimum in barrel. So the harvest in South Africa runs right up until Pesach, and that causes time constraints. And so we've only been able to put our first brandy into barrel around Shavuos time almost 3 years ago. So we're unfortunately going to miss Pesach, but they will be, God willing, on the shelf in time for the following year. But more focused on wine, we've got a Nebbiolo coming out towards the end of this year. We've got dry Riesling from South Africa. It's It's a German variety, but we've made a pretty darn good example of it in South Africa. We've got another white wine blend. We took the Altira concept and said, what if we actually do it in oak instead of acacia? So we've got a blockbuster of a white wine blend coming out similar to the Altira. And we've made our first Pinot Noir from a cool climate, Hemel and Aarde. And that will, God willing, be released next year. So for those who are very, very into their Burgundy style wines, we've got something for you in the coming months as well. So we've got lots in the works.
It's interesting because those who may not know, I mean, you're talking now more like cool climate, Riesling and Pinot Noir, and I probably should ask you right off the bat because I'm so happy to hear that. That's what I could tell you.
Asking for a friend, any bubbly in the process?
Any bubbly in the process? I ask everyone that.
So funnily enough,
Just asking for a friend.
It's a good question. I'd love to make a very typical South African style bubbly, which in South Africa it's called MCC or Method Cap Classique. And they are method champenois, which means they're made in the old world style of making bubblies. And it's a challenge that I would very, very much like to tackle. And I hope to focus on it in the coming vintages. Absolutely.
Another question.
You're singing to Kenny right now.
You know what? I'm just happy to hear about the Riesling. I can't expect everything all at once. I know I'll be asked this afterwards. Are your wines in Israel? Will they get to Israel? I don't actually know the answer. Are they in Israel currently?
They are not currently in Israel, except for the few individuals who have really truly fallen in love with our wines, and they go. Yeah, they go through the hassle of shipping my wines all the way from the bottom of Africa to Israel. And it gives me tremendous pride to know that my wines are being enjoyed in Yerushalayim. And so yes and no, my wines are there, but they are not exported there with the purpose of creating a market. We actually don't produce a significant amount of wine, and we currently only produce enough to satisfy one market, and that being the United States. But here at Hashem, we will produce more in the coming years and have enough to supply the Israeli market.
I am sure that there are a lot of people there that are interested in that. So, listen, I know you're busy, and I know you have to get away, but thank you so much for being with us. Really special. And I want to thank you again for last night, the people that were lucky enough to be here for that.
Thank you. Thank you for putting on quite a show.
Really special. Josh is making amazing wine, and buy it. I can't, like Rabbi Bernath said, it's wine that's probably one of the best. I think you said the best value. I don't know if I said the best value, but that's a big compliment.
A very big one.
He's very complimentary. But it's really it's in a small class of like really getting just tremendous value. That the Altira at that price is such a no-brainer that I shouldn't even drink anything else. But you got to have variety in life. But it's really special wine and at an unbelievable price. So please keep up what you're doing. Hashem should bless you, continue to bless you and your family, and for all of us.
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
It's really great to have you,
Rabbi. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and thank you for your time. And you're very, very busy as well. So
last thing, where can you find these wines in the United States at least?
So if it's a kosher wine shop in New York, New Jersey, I know there are a couple of individuals who stock it in Florida, California. I think there's a shop or two, but kosherwine.com has it. Online Kosher Wine has it. And if you're that desperate, you can always message Kenny, and Kenny can the way to get it to you.
I will. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.